Frans Emil Sillanpää was the first Finn to win a Nobel Prize. He is, even to this day, the only Finnish author who has received the Nobel Prize in Literature. But you have probably never heard of him or read any of his works. You might think to yourself that Finnish schools are making the students to read his works tenuously, but that is not the case. He is somehow a very forgotten figure even in his home country. I would like to introduce you to his masterpiece, Hurskas kurjuus, or Pious Misery, as it could be translated for English. Far as I know, there is no English translation to the book. That is why I feel comfortable to summarize the book for you. If you are a Finnish speaker, or you might find the translation of this book for your native tongue, then I suggest that you stop watching this video and get a hold of this book immediately. Sillanpää was only 30 years old when he wrote this in 1918. It was published a year later because it dealt with the sensitive matter of the Finnish Civil War that was fought very briefly in 1918. It was not a very small skirmish, but one of the most bloodiest civil wars if you compare the death toll to the short period of time that it was fought on. There was still very deep divide with the socialist red forces and nationalistic white forces in 1990. And this book decided to walk the middle road when looking back at this bloody turmoil of Finland. Sillanpää was himself a neutral actor during the Civil War, and it is amazing how he can look this whole human misery from a distance. The reception for the book was lukewarm, but I think it perfectly encapsulates why Sillanpää is our only Nobel Prize winner. He received the prize for his deep understanding of his country's peasantry and the exquisite art with which he has portrayed their way of life and their relationship with nature. So without further delay, let's go through this book. We start with the hot topic of Civil War aftermath. 8 red rebels are being executed by the victorious government side. When 7 of them are shot, the last one of the men causes a humorous scene when he goes to lie down to the pile of bodies behind him before he is even shot. He is commanded to stand straight and then he is shot down. This last man was called Johann Abraham, son of Benjamin, who holds a surname of Toivola. His first name changes with different variations of Johann, so we might call him John for this summary of the book. His last name, Toivola, means a place of hope, so let's call him John the Hopeful. What was he trying to accomplish with this bizarre scene at his own execution? He was just trying to be helpful to his executioners because he has lived a life of a servant. And there was also a deep need for rest because his life has been a page from the book of Job. John the Hopeful was born in 1857 in the house of Nikkilä. Nikki means a foot soldier and comes from the German word Landschnitt. Not very glorious name, and that is how exactly this house is described for. The master of the house is a peasant called Benjamin. Hard-hitting, drinking, smoking bully that is already 50 years old. It is his third wife, Maija, that gives birth to his only son, John. Maija is a young maid who is happy to have married a peasant. Maija comes from the peasant family herself, but because of the hereditary system and the number of children, her inheritance was too meager, and like many surplus members of peasant families, they fall into landless caste that works for the households around them. But like I said, Maija has managed to climb on the social ladder with her marriage, even though his husband Benjamin is not a very pleasant man. Life in the household goes by the temper of Benjamin, who is the absolute anarchist patriarch. He loves the pleasures of life, and especially the pleasures of the peasant caste. He likes to showcase himself in fights and drinking. Obviously, a man with this temper is going to carry debt with his reckless lifestyle. John has only one fond memory of his father, and it was from the time when he was around 5 years old. His father decided to grab him to his arms and offered a roasted turnip from his pocket and a smoke to go with it. Otherwise, he liked to bully and command in the household, and John preferred to stay playing with the adult children outside the house instead of being the object of father's weird sadism. When the year is 1866, the weather turns crazy, and there is a normal summer only for around 2 weeks. People have faced the total loss of their crops. This is when Nikkilä household sells their cattle to manage with the losses. Benjamin, of course, spends most of the income on booze and tobacco, bringing only 1 barrel of seeds for the next year. Then, when the year changes, the summer is still too short and cold. Gamble is lost and debts are growing. His father stops being a strutting alpha male of the village, but carries the heavy debt burden that turns him a humble man. Benjamin knows that this is his end. Because of the disastrous circumstances of the last year's weather, there are roaming beggars from neighboring counties that are walking through the countryside. They beg for food, and their numbers seem to increase. In the following Christmas of 1867, Benjamin starts to get physically sick with a fever. His mental authority is also diminishing. He used to shout for the beggars to leave in a violent manner, but now he is too weak. Most of beggars that visit the house of Nikkelä quickly notice that there is nothing to eat in here, and after sleeping one night, they move on. These traveling beggars are waking up John's senses and are calling him for an adventure and exploration of the world. Soon, Benjamin loses his house for the debts and dies before the auction in great despair. John and his mother Maya join the traveling beggars and travel to Maya's relatives. During this journey, 9-year-old John the hopeful sees the peak misery of the famine years. Death toll reaches its height, even though the weather returns to normal in the following year. There is a very vivid image of a mentally disabled girl dressed in adult male clothes. She is standing on the roadside, next to a dead man who is presumably her father. Beggars are asking for the girl to join with them, so she does not get eaten by the wolves. But she just stares back with her empty look. Maya and John arrive to the house of Tuorila. This house name could be translated to the house of fresh or new. Maya's brother is the master of the house. Stern power figure who is very different compared to John's chivalrous father. For John, he will always be a master and not an uncle. House of Tuorila is the center of food aid in the area, and it is heavily implied that they take more than their share from the flour. Soon after arriving, Maya wants to go to look for a job because of her pride. She returns 2 months later with a fever. She dies quickly, and John does not get to even say goodbye to her. At the age of 10, John's childhood ends. In this financially stable and promising household, he is in between being a family member and house servant. This makes him a somewhat outcast for the rest of his life. Servants or family members don't see him as their own. There is no father figure in the house. His uncle belittles him at best and never sees any potential in John. He is seen as a dimwit and lazy, but the text tells us that he is obviously lost in the trauma of life. There is horrible alienation that he could never shake off from his period in Tuorila. During his time in there, he does his only formal education in the church school, which teaches literacy and catechisms. One is considered an adult after this period, but John does not feel like it at the age of 12. John's uncle is very financially wise. He is moving ahead in the ladder of the society. He especially struck gold by holding his forest until the prices of lumber reached sky high. During a meeting to intermingle with the new elite, the local elite gathers to his house of Tuorila. John is left to take care of the horse carriages outside. While doing his part, he meets a male servant called Kustaa, who is of his age. He tries to mingle with him, and they share some laughs between each other. Kustaa decides to do a prank and unscrews the wheels from the carriages. John is horrified and tries to fix the situation, but he doesn't manage to do it on time. The outcome is a disaster. He receives the worst beating from his uncle than ever before. He runs out of Tuorila, and in the following morning he comes to a small cabin that is on Tuorila's land. There he finds a rent farmers of Toivola, whose son Kustaa is. They take him in, but very soon it is revealed that they are not very moral people. Kustaa denies having any part of the misfortune with the carriages. The uncle has given John some money that the mother has kept without telling John about it. Soon a party of lumberjacks arrive to the house, and their leader Kauppila is looking for local men to join with them. John is being sent to work for him. When he is asked to sign a name for the contract, he gives the name of the house, Toivola, as his surname. If you meet a Finn, his surname is most likely a house name, where his peasant kin had lived for centuries. John is now working at 13 years old as a lumberjack. It is soon revealed that all the paychecks have not reached John at all, and the mother of Kustaa has kept them all. Kauppila notices this and pries into the matter at hand. After a big showdown, John, for the first and only time in his life, receives justice. Mother of Kustaa gives back everything she had taken from John. Soon after this break of justice, John loses his first paychecks in a card game with other lumberjacks. Taste of life at its best. But life continues, and John leaves Toivola and starts to follow Kauppila and his party of lumberjacks all over Finland. Kauppila is his father figure that teaches him how to make a living and how to be an independent man in the world. At this point of the book, life passes on quickly for John. He does not feel adventurous while traveling, just work that is repetitive. His place in life is a mystery. Unlike other men, he does not form romantic connection with women or have camaraderie with men around him. When he is around 37, Kauppila is finally dead, and John decides to settle down and work as a farmhand in the town where he was born in. His father's house has been turned around in the hands of a prosperous peasant, and it emits a strange mystery of life to him. John is still lost in life. He is lonely, a virgin, who forcefully portrays himself as a man who has a place in life to people around him. He jokes confidently around his peers, but he is lost and is afraid to approach women in a romantic sense. The house he is working for as a farmhand is called Pirjola. There the master of the house is very kind and supportive to John, which is very unusual in his lifeline. In this house he meets maid Riina, who will become his much younger wife. Riina is already pregnant when John climbs to her bed. She accepts John because she knows that she will never get to marry the peasant that is most likely the father of the child. For John, she is the first woman that he has had courage to approach. Riina is loyal to John, but she is a lazy worker. But John loves her either way, and their hobby will be arguing gently about their situation at hand. Then it is time for marriage, which master of Pirjola pays for them. After marriage, the next step is to become a rent farmer. But unfortunately, Pirjola house does not have any free lots for the couple. Instead, they find a free cabin from Yrjölä lands. The master of the house and its future master are not very pleasant people to the family of hopefuls. There is again very clever nomenclatura here. Pirjola name refers to Saint Birgit, who was a Swedish female mystic. The name of Yrjölä refers to Saint George, who was a soldier and a patron saint of Russians. Make what you want from these references, but the symbolism to the situation at hand makes it very clever. The social schism continues with John and the masters he serves. They see him as upcoming beginner who wants to rise to their level. There is just something about this inferior John the Hopeful that makes the masters look down on him and resent him, although he acts as a humble farm worker for them. In marriage and the love for his wife, his life has finally started, but being a rent farmer is a harsh life. His own rented plot requires a lot of work, and he must also do 15 hours of work days for his landlord in Yrjölä. He becomes a father of 3. Making money is an arduous task, and he starts to transport cargo from nearby paper mills with his horse and carriage. He makes a meager living with his third job, and his salary disappears quickly. His whole rent farm is on lifeline that hangs on the horse. It provides valuable extra income and makes the work days for the landlord easier. After one long cargo run, John feels the nature of his father calling him. He decides to buy liquor and goes drinking with some peasants. He feels a need to show off and decides to buy a timepiece for himself, a pocket watch. When he arrives after a long working day to his house, he is drunk and tired. But he wants to cause trouble like his old father when he sees his family sleeping peacefully. He starts to whip them and shouts at them to get out of the house. He breaks his new pocket watch in the frenzy. The self-destructive, maniacal scene comes to a stop when he sees his younger son, Ville, has not escaped from the house with the rest of the family, even though he is the most agile and fast one. He approaches the child, who just lies on his bunk, and looks scared of his father, who has never done a scene like this. John falls down from the sight. The reason why Ville did not get up was because the oldest son, Kalle, had hit him with a log on his back while John was away. Now Ville is practically an invalid. Not just that, but Ville is going to die in a very painful manner that will take a long time. He will whimper and moan during the nights, and most of the time there is no medicine to offer to him. His family will spend everything that they have for him, of course. Now, this is the most hardest part for me in the book, so I don't want to discuss more about it. You can all imagine if you would have to watch your young son dying slowly in pain. His oldest son, Kalle, the culprit of this tragedy, is sent away quickly as a laborer to the city. Life goes on, and the thin lifeline of income quickly breaks down from the financial burden of a dying child. The only horse of the household is lost, and debt for landlord is growing. In this horrible atmosphere of the house, 2 more children are born after Kalle is sent away. Oldest child is daughter Hilda, who is quiet and delicate child that tries to work her best to run the house with her mother. John acts according to his name and refuses to give up on Ville's suffering. Even without a horse, he decides to travel to Tuorila household, where he has a distant but a wealthy second cousin. When he arrives there, the new master of Tuorila recognizes him. The house has become more prominent and influential, and there is even a telephone in the house. John has never seen one. The master is apparently an enthusiastic nation-building man, and he wants to hear a tale from John that could be collected for the poem books. From these poem books we get the Finnish bacon lore that I talk about in this channel. John can't remember a single story at the moment, and instead starts to tell about his situation. What does this tale of John's sound like to you at this point? Book of Job maybe? Well, after telling his miserable situation to the nationalistic educated man who is trying to build the nation of Finland, well, he does not show much of a Christian mercy, but gives a formal alm, of course. John receives 10 marks, a room to stay, and some food. The master of Tuorila does not seem to give much thought for his own distant cousin, and leaves to focus on higher concepts of society. This is a very clever social critic from the author, but I will return to this point much later, because there's another similar point in the book that really showcases us what the author is trying to tell us. When John returns from Tuorila, Ville has died in the previous night. Everyone is some way relieved that the innocent child does not need to feel pain anymore. The 10 marks goes to various expenses, and it could not have saved the family anyway. You can't buy a new horse with 10 marks. Soon after Ville's death, John's wife Rina starts to get tired and refuses to sleep next to John. It is implied that he has some sort of cancer in her sexual reproduction organs that is a taboo. She starts to moan and breathe heavily during the days and dies after a long turmoil. Another human misery that has made the financial situation even worse. John has now 3 children and he's going down the ladder of society again. John has accepted that life is bittersweet substance that you must slowly digest so you don't vomit it all out. When the new master lectures him about the unpaid workdays and poorly productive lands, he still gets to live in his cabin with his children, long as he continues doing workdays for the Yrjölä household. There's only 1 cow to feed 4 people now. Somehow John is relieved that there is no more farm that he has to upkeep, and he enjoys gathering berries for a living. When selling these berries, he gets an offer to send Hilda as a maid to a high-class widower. He accepts it, but Hilda is extremely sad for leaving this poor household. Now there is only John and 2 remaining children, daughter Lempi and son Martti. John becomes more vocal when he grows older and gives spiteful remarks about his life. He likes to preach or sermon to the people about the misjustice in the world. He receives letters from his oldest son Kalle, who is now working as a cab driver in the city. Kalle also sends the socialist newspapers to John and the remaining family. Although Kalle is class-conscious Marxist, there is something very alienating in his letters. For the death of Ville, he just remarks the incident briefly and tells the family to concentrate on the revolution at hand. For those who are unaware of this time of the history, this is 1905 and the Russian Empire is falling down in the aftermath of Russo-Japanese. Socialist and nationalistic movements are gaining ground in the hearts of men. For John, there is not really deep burn of socialism in him. He thinks little of Kalle's letters and the socialist newspapers that he sends to the family. He thinks there is something wrong in how they talk about poverty. It is either too pious and righteous in its tone. In other cases, the articles are like fairy tales that old maids tell to children. John thinks that he is the only authority on the social issues of life. Life is unfair, but that is how it will always remain. There will always be the ones with the houses and ones without. He thinks receiving any more education on the matter is only a scam, and he ain't going to articulate himself any more than that. When every man and woman got voting right in 1906 in Finland, John of course did not vote. He thinks he is too good for it. The most concerning letter that he receives from Kalle tells that Hilda has drowned herself briefly after entering the service. There is again more political talk than any concern about his deceased little sister. Kalle spends more time writing how there was so little to send back from Hilda's paycheck. This letter, although dramatic and another bittersweet fruit for John to digest, it showcases how well the author Sillanpää writes subtext. Kalle is high on socialist ideology, but at the same time, he is more concerned about money rather than his own family. Sillanpää does not underline it for you, but he lets you figure it out by yourself. Just like in the case of John's distant second cousin not having any interest on John's life, even though he is being high on the ideology of united national state with his kin. And like I said, he does not write it down for you. You can figure this out by yourself with your common sense. Uneducated common sense that John has in his working man's spine. Imagine that you would meet some sleazy salesman that is trying to offer you the deal of the lifetime. You know how to reject that kind of offer. Sillanpää is asking us to rely on the common sense when it is time for politics and passionate ideology. Few years after writing Pious Misery, Sillanpää wrote his personal favorite that deals about the fate of Hilda. If you want me to summarize this novel also, then let me know. It is a much shorter novel, that is almost like Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, but Sillanpää writes less dialogue and more narrative, and he makes it very clear in the novel of his critical stance towards the romantic hero. Well, let's get back to the end of John. By the winter of 1980, we get another glimpse of John the hopeful. He has fallen down even further, and his household has been auctioned to an educated peasant called Rinne, who takes care of John in the cheapest budget possible. This is how auctioneering of people who could not provide for themselves worked. Everyone wanted to pay little for county's welfare budget, and the one who would take care of the elderly, the mentally insane, orphans, and etc. at the lowest price would win the auction. Sometimes auctions were not necessarily held, but the system was basically the same. Some household would take care of the rubble of the society with the cheapest budget possible. Rinne is not a bad man towards John, but he is a socialist leader that is preparing an armed rebellion. He obviously comes from different social class than John and is quite a civilized man. His surname Rinne means hillside, quite fitting name for the coming struggle. The Finnish left has lost the elections in 1917, and now they try to seek for other means to power. John is caught up in the rebellion plan by simply coming to ask his monthly food aid from Rinne. For 3 days, he is a guest on the house, stuck on the situation, while men and guns roam inside the house and start to form the red side. John thinks it is like a strike, and the issue will be resolved by simply with their presence. He is more concerned about his young children who have been left to eat potatoes and some salt water from herrings 3 days ago. The short civil war of Finland lasts a little bit under 4 months, but for John and his home region, the fight lasts less than 3 months. For this brief period of revolution, John's status in the world increases and his children are finally probably fed, since he works as a confiscator for the local wealthy homesteads in his area. His social position still remains poor. Many peasants are disappointed that it is John the Hopeful that is being sent to confiscate their property. They would rather prefer any other red rebel doing the job. Even among the Reds, John is seen as an outsider and he is not seen as their equal. When he makes his bitter remark to the local nobleman that is being interrogated in the house of Kauppila, Kauppila starts to feel ashamed that the local gentleman would think that John is the archetype of red rebels. Again, the author Sillanpää shows us the hypocrisy behind a grand ideology. Before the rebellion starts to crumble, John senses that the local leaders are portraying themselves as too calm. Kauppila gives him an unusual order and asks him to bring back the local nobleman that was under interrogation a while ago. It is very unusual that instead of logistics, John would have to arrest someone. He takes his rifle with him and starts to travel across the icy lake with his horse carriage to the estate's shore. While traveling there, he meets random red rebels that are fleeing to the opposite direction of him. He does not understand these brief and chaotic encounters, even though some of them tell him that the front line is broken. He comes to the mansion and sees no one in there. He again gets an ominous feeling that everything is not okay. He wants to return back to Kauppila, but on the way back, he sees a sight that will damn him. The local nobleman is shot on the ice along his horse. Terrified of the sight, he runs away back to his own home. For some reason, he decides to drop his rifle next to the corpse. Random action that will doom him. Inside his home, he regrets the whole rebellion and is grateful that he never took part in the fighting, and he never really hurt anyone. In the following morning, someone from the house of Pirjola is leading the local white militiaman to his home. Remember, it was House of Pirjola where he actually met a person who was looking after him and showed some support for him. I guess this modern book of Job ends like the Gospels. John is of course innocent, but this does not matter in the face of certain evidence that he is the one that murdered the local nobleman. You don't need much evidence in this scenario. Many Reds meet their end, whether they deserved it or not. In the end, John worries about his 2 remaining children. At least the daughter is old enough to work as a maid, but the son has to be auctioned or put in orphanage. The children don't know the fate of their father, even though they try to ask from the local houses some news. There is no one to defend him, although people are surprised that John would actually shoot someone. The end is inevitable, there is nothing good at it, but John, for some reason, he smirks at the end before joining the piles of bodies in the ditch behind him.